Happy Tuesday, everybody. I don't know if you can say happy Tuesday. I don't know if Tuesdays are too happy, but we're happy to have you here. That's what we're going to say.
It's not a bad Tuesday as far as Tuesdays go. I think it felt like a long weekend, at least for me. Last weekend, Memorial Day weekend was kind of a dud. And this weekend, beach weather all weekend. So
it was a very nice weekend. Now Alex is in the middle of a thunderstorm. So if you hear the rolling thunder in the background, you will understand. And if we lose Alex, then it's probably because the power went out. But we're going to try it anyway. Patriots Beat Podcast, Evan Lazar, alongside me as always, Alex Barth of 98.5. And Alex, this is the first time that we've done the pod since Julio Jones was traded to the Tennessee Titans. So we're going to talk about that trade, the fallout of that trade, why the Patriots weren't more interested in Julio. Then we're going to get into some OTA preview type of stuff. Thursday's practice will be open to the media, so we'll be back out in Foxborough on Thursday. So we'll talk some Patriots OTAs, and then we'll take some questions at the end if we have some time there to kill within the next hour. So let's start right off the top with just news in general of Julio Jones getting traded to the Titans. The Titans were the favorites, or the heavy favorites, I would say, just in terms of what was being reported for quite some time. And there was those pictures of Julio training with Derrick Henry, Alabama guys. There's a lot of things tying him to Tennessee, and it sounded like Tennessee was
the A.J. Brown recruiting.
Yeah, it was the most aggressive team, to pursue Julio. But what was your initial reaction to the Julio trade to Tennessee, and how much do you worry about the Titans now in the AFC?
A lot. And I think the Titans knocked it out of the park. I've said it before on this program. I think there's a real chance now that the Titans finish with the best record in the AFC. I don't think they're the best team, but when you factor in, how new this offense is going to be and that element of it and the division they play in, I think they're a threat. And people will come at me and say that their defense sucked last year, and that's not an incorrect assessment. But I think their defense in some ways, I think they just had guys who had down seasons. I don't know that the unit they were last year accurately depicts the talent level, if that makes sense. I think just by, natural, moving back to the mean, they'll be good. So I saw somebody tweet when it happened, oh man, that's, it's such a disappointing ending. What's the word I'm looking for?
Anticlimactic.
Thank you. And these are always anticlimactic. When a major player gets moved like this, don't screw around. The Titans had the most to gain by making this move, I think, more than the Patriots. They had the most to gain by making this move. They went out, they made it. They're a very good football team now. They're going to be a ton of fun to watch. And yeah, they're a threat in the AFC. I think it's them and Kansas City as 1 and 2. And then you probably have Buffalo kind of right there with Baltimore is vying for that third spot. But the Titans are a real deal right now. They not that they weren't before, but this takes it to another level.
The Titans are going to test what we know about how to play defensive football just from a structural standpoint, because they had Corey Davis, and Corey Davis is a good player, but he's not Julio Jones, right? And so when you came out to play the Titans, you could put extra guys in the box. You could play single high against them and rotate over the top and not be as concerned about the passing game. Now, the passing game in Tennessee was really prolific, especially off of play action, because of how good Derrick Henry is and because of how many resources need to be invested in stopping that running game. Now you really, if you're a defensive coordinator, when Bill Belichick and the Patriots prepare for the Titans this season, they're going to have to think about, okay, do we play them single high, or do we play too deep to keep two safeties deep over the top of A.J. Brown and Julio Jones and give up a body in the box to Derrick Henry? Or do we first and foremost stop the run, focus on that, and then worry about the passing game from there? Typically, Bill Belichick goes the route of let's stop the run, right? Because that's the easiest way to move the football, is to just hand the ball off to Henry. But the problem is when you get into that sort of game, then the Titans shorten the game. Right. Then they end up having, Alex, I think your lights went out. I don't know if we lost Alex. We might have just lost Alex to a rolling thunderstorm through the outskirts of Boston here. So I'll try to carry the pod for a few minutes here and continue my thought, and hopefully we'll get Alex back here in a second. But what I was saying about kind of rotating through single high structures versus two high structures is really important when we're starting to talk about the Tennessee Titans now. And as we've sort of seen the evolution of the NFL defenses and the NFL passing game, we have seen teams, defenses, specifically in terms of what we've seen from teams like the Los Angeles Rams, for example, with Brandon Staley, is get into more too deep type of stuff, which is a very common coverage in the college game, not so much in the pro game until now, where you're playing a lot of quarters on early downs, or you're playing maybe some variations of cover 2 as well, but really a cover 4 quarters based structure scheme. And what that allows you to do is when you start at too high, and now a lot of people don't like to stay stagnant and they want to rotate as well. So when you start at too high, what you're doing is you are one short in the box, but you can rotate that safety down into the box as another run defender, or as potentially somebody that's going to cut a crossing route or cut as something coming over the middle like a deep dig. We do have Alex back in the dark. I love what's going on here.
So my power's out. I'm using the hotspot on my phone. I've got an old iPhone as the light, so I apologize that maybe we'll tell some ghost stories. Some maybe that's what we'll, it's June. We got to come up with football content. Maybe some scary football stories.
This is really this is what happens when technology fails us, and Mother Nature can still knock the power out. That's the one thing that. But the Patriots Beat podcast, we don't stop rolling here on Patriots Beat, right, Alex? We figure it out. I love this. This is great. I think I could said enough about defending the Titans and how it's going to be difficult to decipher whether
I had an interesting thought. 1 second. Sure. I just want to make sure that this is going to stay up. So you mentioned that it's what was the exact word? It's going to change the way we view playing defense. It's going to test the way we view playing defense. Whatever it is, like I think that it's going to test the way teams build. It's going to test roster building as we know it, because for the last 20 years, pretty much since the Patriots went on that one run with Brady and the Colts had their success with Manning, the idea was get the quarterback at all costs. And if you find the quarterback, whatever you put around him, you have around him, and you'll still probably succeed. The Titans are the antithesis of that. Not that Ryan Tannehill's bad. I think he's been good since he got to Tennessee, but Defensive Player of the Year in Derrick Henry, arguably the best wide receiver in football in Julio Jones. A.J. Brown's another. Am I stretching if I call him a top 10 receiver? I think he's certainly top 15. You look at the offensive line they have. They have some superstars on the offensive line, right? Chief among them, Taylor Lewan, of course. So, where everything's been get the quarterback. And I've talked about this in the past as it relates to the Patriots, right? And using the 2019 49ers as that model, the net neutral quarterback. If you can put the talent around him, this is the most extreme example of that we've seen thus far, right? So if the Titans succeed, I think you're going to see teams try to copy this model where, you know what? We're not going to go out and give up 5 first-round picks to draft a quarterback that we don't know if he'll be good. We'll take the receiver. We'll take the tackle. We'll take the tight end. We know it's the sure thing because they'll hit, and then we just have to get a competent quarterback, which is much easier. So if the Titans go on a run here, I think you're going to see a new era of roster building come from that.
It's a great point, and it's something that we've talked a lot about on the show, and we sort of compared it to Jimmy G, right, in San Francisco, and said they made the Super Bowl with Jimmy G at quarterback, attempting, 8 passes or something like that in the NFC Championship game. Yep. And you don't
fewest in the modern era.
Right. You don't need, now you need a great defense. You need a great supporting cast around all that, but you don't necessarily need Tom Brady. You don't need Peyton Manning. You don't need Joe Montana or John Elway or Dan Marino or whatever GOAT quarterback you want to use to make a deep playoff run and to contend in the NFL. What you do need is a great roster, and the Titans, Ryan Tannehill is a solid NFL quarterback, and I think he's better than maybe some people think, but he's still not going to the Hall of Fame, right? He's still Ryan Tannehill to some degree, and they have made him look like a really, really great quarterback by putting him in a really good position to succeed and in a great system.
It's the opposite of what everybody's been doing, right? You look at the Patriots and it was, our receivers are Kembrell Tompkins and whatever's left of Austin Collie, right? And Tyquan Underwood and that. And the idea was, those guys aren't the best, but Brady will elevate them. And I think teams are finally starting to realize, I just noticed the shadows of my hands on the wall behind me. Real exaggerating. What teams are now starting to realize is that system works in reverse. And maybe Ryan Tannehill's not the best quarterback, but the pieces around him are going to make him better. And I think this is going to be really exciting if this catches on, a really exciting era for the league, because the league being quarterback driven was certainly fun, but I think in some ways it hurts the overall game in that
there's just not enough good quarterbacks to have that be the case.
And you're limited with good teams in that. You're kind of limited in who your superstars are too. When you start having the impact player in an offense not just be at one position, it's really going to open up different styles of play, different kinds of players. It's just going to make the game more well-rounded. So it's something that I think has the potential to be very exciting.
Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating to see how defensive coordinators around the league sort of evolve, because the Titans and Arthur Smith's now in Atlanta, obviously, but they're going to continue their system, right? They're going to continue running their scheme. Is still a very heavy outside zone, play action heavy offense, similar to what we see in San Fran and with the Los Angeles Rams. And what we've seen across the league is sort of what I was talking about earlier. It was a lot more too high structures, so you can rotate those safeties to cut off those crossing routes and those deep crossers, and then insert into the box to stop the run, but give that too high look. This is what the Patriots did in Super Bowl 53 against the Rams. They've done it in the past, the same sort of style against the Titans in the playoffs and in other instances. So I'm really fascinated to see how defensive football catches up to not only that scheme, certainly, but also just everything that this arms race, right? That all these teams are just, everything's about accumulating as many weapons as possible. It's going to be really interesting to see how these defenses sort of evolve to that. Were you surprised that the Patriots weren't more interested in Julio Jones? Because I reported, Jeff Howe reported, Peter King reported, a lot of people reporting at this point that the Pats sort of made a call early on in the process, recognized that the price point wasn't going to be where they wanted it to be, and sort of bowed out awfully quickly in this, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm not totally shocked. I think it's kind of how they handle free agency, right? It's, everybody else is going to negotiate and everybody else is going to play their games, but we have our price and that's what it is. And, you either meet it or we move on and we can find somebody else. And I think that if the price was right, I don't think they were against acquiring Julio Jones. I feel like some people have tried to paint it that way. I don't think that they were, totally against it. But given the contract and everything, I just think they had a certain amount they were willing to spend, and that amount was non-negotiable. And by the way, if you're just joining, my power's out, which is why I look like this.
It's actually, you're coming in through very, very clear for somebody. What are you on, a hotspot right now?
I'm on the phone hotspot. So we'll see. I have full juice. My computer's at 88%. So we should be able to get through the show, hopefully. Knock on wood. But it's just the shadows behind me are,
This is fascinating. I know you're mesmerizing me with the shadows. And there's the evil laugh too on top of all of it. Now
I need a cat. That's what because this chair even spins too, so I can do like the the Dr. Evil thing. All right, let's get back to football.
You're getting me dizzy now. So the contract is really what it came down to with Julio Jones. I think the Patriots and a couple of other teams that were interested in Jones were interested in Jones under the assumption that maybe they could do something with that contract, right? The Pats, quite frankly, did not want to pay Julio Jones $15 million in 2021. It's really that simple. They could have done the trade compensation. I think the trade compensation, on top of the fact that you had to pay him $15 million, was a big part of it as well. But the second and the fourth round pick was not the deal breaker, right? The deal breaker was that it was a second and the fourth round pick, and you had to pay the full $15 million. The Falcons weren't going to eat any of it, and Julio wasn't going to rework the contract because he didn't have to, right? There was enough suitors out there, Tennessee being chief among them, that he didn't have to go out there and rip up his deal to make a trade happen, or the Falcons didn't have to give up a lot in the trade, right? They didn't have to give only take a 6th round pick or a 4th round pick back. There was legitimate interest in Julio, which is obviously not shocking, but that was the point, was that the Patriots, like they did in free agency, if there was a market inefficiency, if they recognize, wow, we can really get this player because nobody else is bidding, we can really get this player for pennies on the dollar, then we're going to go out and make this move. But that isn't what ended up being the case. So I think that's a big part of it, is that the Patriots spent like that in free agency because they saw sort of an inefficiency in the market, right? That they were able to see, we have all this money, nobody else has any money, we can sign all these guys and nobody else can. but that's not the case with the Julio thing. Is there was enough bidders, there was enough people that wanted Julio that they had to pay top dollar for him, and that just never was going to happen. So the other thing, just really quickly before we move on to OTAs, I know everybody wants to knee-jerk compare this to the Mohamed Sanu trade and say, well, they give up a second-round pick for Mohamed Sanu, but they wouldn't give up the trade compensation for Julio Jones. It's not an apples to apples comparison. Like I understand that we want to make it into an apples to apples comparison, but it really isn't, because at the time that trade went down, it's about the timing, right? Acquiring a player at a trade deadline. You're in a bidding war for that player. You need that player to fill an immediate need. It's a midseason trade, and it's a much different kind of buyer's market at that point than what we're looking at here. So I understand that the Patriots' views of the wide receiver position, N'Keal Harry, Nelson Aguilar for the price that they paid, not trading for Julio, but trading for Sanu with a second-round pick. These things look like the Patriots don't know what they're doing at wide receiver. And maybe that ends up being the case, but the main point that I wanted to make on the Julio thing was just let's let this all get out there first. Let's see what Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry and Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne and all these guys look like together on a football field and in the game before we start saying the Patriots don't have enough weapons, right? We don't know if the Patriots don't have enough weapons just yet, and they have this plan, and Julio was not part of this plan at any point, and I think we should at least give them the benefit of the doubt to let's see if it works. Let's give it a chance before we start to say they didn't do enough this offseason, because they did spend a whole lot of money on pass catchers.
Well, that's what I've been saying, right? That's what I've been saying this whole time, is that you can't go by the two letters next to the player's name on the roster. It's just you're not looking at the whole picture that way, right? You have to look at how the tight ends are going to factor into the passing game, and just there's so many snaps. There's only so many snaps to go around for everybody. And if you add, again, Julio Jones was different because he's such an elite talent. But now you have people saying, "Oh, well, they missed on Julio. They should go sign."
Andy Isabella, Golden Tate.
Golden Tate was the one I was thinking of. Andy Isabella, Larry Fitzgerald, whoever.
Right.
Are any of those guys monumental improvements over what they have? I don't know. And you're not adding them. Right. You're not putting Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, and Golden Tate out on the field a significant amount of the time, because if you do that, then you're keeping one of your tight ends on the bench, and that's just not a return on your investment for the money you spent this offseason. So I get it. It's an adjustment, but it's going to be a 2 wide receiver offense. Do they have the best 2 wide receivers in the league? No, certainly not. But I think the guys they have are one, great fits for what they want to do. And fit can make a good player great, right? Or I know people say lack of fit can make a good player bad. I look at it the other way. If you have a player who's a really good fit in the system, it can truly elevate that player. I think they have a couple guys who can do that. And I think there's room to grow too, I think, for Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers. So again, I trust the tight ends. I trust the tight ends. I'd rather go down with that ship than panic and give up a ton and sacrifice all this cap space for Julio Jones when you may not ultimately need him.
Yeah, that was the plan, right? This is the plan, and it's a viable plan on paper. It's not a plan that we have seen this succeed here before with Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, and it's a plan that has worked in the NFL before. So let's let it fail before we start saying that the plan is no good, because it's a legitimate plan on paper to make the receivers and the weapons around whoever is playing quarterback better than it was the last 2 years. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt for now. Let's talk some OTAs. Patriots now 3rd week of OTAs. We're getting into sort of the ramped up period. Devin McCourty, Matt Judon, those 2 guys reported yesterday. So we're starting to see, I was actually really surprised, just a side note, I was actually really surprised to see Devin McCourty at voluntary OTAs. As somebody that's so vocal in the Players Association, it definitely felt like he was somebody that was going to hold out on principle along with the other players that have been sitting out the non-mandatory portion of the offseason. So I was really surprised when I saw number 32 out there yesterday. I thought for sure he was going to be somebody that wasn't going to show up until minicamp.
And it seems like they're kind of bringing these guys back now closer to minicamp. And I wonder if that was part of it. It was, hey, Devin, or even if it's a guy like Matt Judon, just, this is when we're really ramping up. The first 2 weeks are for the new guys. So it definitely was good to see him and another other people. Kyle Van Noy, I know he was back last week, but a guy who missed the initial session coming back. Chase Winovich, who I think has a very, very big camp ahead of him, has now, it looks like, been back after missing that first session and been a regular. So I have no problem with guys easing themselves into OTAs, as we saw last year, and this is the argument that players have made. They're not super necessary. You can still have a good season without them. So I have no problem with some of these more veteran guys easing their way back in. And yeah, a guy like Devin showing up before he has to, I think, is big.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of this quarterback stuff still. It's what's on everybody's mind. Cam Newton gets hurt. It opens the door, at least for Mac Jones. I guess we can say it opens the door for Jarrett Stidham as well.
Well, he was the big performer on Friday. So
yeah, we'll get to Stidham in a second. But what do you want to see out of Mac? And we can also include this with mini camp as well, because mini camp starts Monday through Wednesday of next week. So we might not talk about it necessarily before mini camp gets underway. But what do you want to see from Mac on Thursday next week to sort of, is there a chance, like as we titled this show, is there a chance that this injury for Cam Newton can actually expedite the Patriots to getting to Mac Jones faster?
Yes and no. I think it can if they're willing to let it happen. And this goes back to what I've been saying since before Cam resigned. I don't know that Bill Belichick can quit Cam Newton. I don't know that he can. But if they are open to the idea of it I'm working under the assumption that they're not open to the idea of an open competition. That right. Cam's going to be the starter week 1, regardless of what happens. That's already made up. That the mind's already made up, unless Cam can't throw week 1, and then it's a discussion. If it is a real competition and Bill's willing to open his mind and let Mac potentially start, then this definitely opens the door, because not only does it allow Mac mini camp time that Cam doesn't have, Mac's going to hit the ground running. He's been throwing. He's been working with these guys, where Cam Newton, and granted, he's a veteran, so I don't know how much this affects him, but he's coming in cold a little bit. So there's maybe a little bit of a bend there where Mac's been able to build chemistry with these guys. Cam is, sitting in the training room, icing his hand or whatever he's doing.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it that the Patriots so far have treated Mac Jones differently than the other quarterbacks out at OTAs so far. I mean, when we saw them last week, Mac Jones was working basically had a different practice routine for the first 30, 45 minutes with Josh McDaniels, where he's doing his own drills, right? He's doing his own his own thing. And they are, I'm not going to, I don't know what the right word is for it, but they're certainly emphasizing Mac Jones a lot more, especially Josh McDaniels' time, a lot more focused on Mac than I've ever seen with any quarterback, really. I mean, besides maybe, I guess if you were around when Jimmy Garoppolo was a rookie, you can speak to that more. We weren't, but with Jarrett Stidham, when he came in, he was just another one of the guys in line. Right. Right. He was not somebody that was getting pulled to the side by McDaniels or was working on drills with McDaniels exclusively in a different section where the rest of the offense was someplace else. So they clearly have a calculated plan in place for how they are going to handle this with Mac Jones, to the point where they're doing it out at practice already, where he's sort of doing his own thing at times. Right. So my gut tells me that if they're doing all these things even already at OTAs, and they have this detailed of a plan in mind, I kind of find it hard to believe that an injury to Cam Newton would take them off that track, right? Because that risks long-term side effects to Mac Jones, right? We saw in the past where you throw a quarterback, the one that everybody always goes to is David Carr. Right, the Texans put David Carr in the game behind a terrible offensive line. He got killed, and his whole career kind of went down the drain. Right, the other one that you can kind of talk to is Josh Rosen. Right, who's another player that got thrown into the fire behind a bad O-line, and the thing went south. Now, the Patriots have a very good O-line. Mac Jones is going to be put in that position, but clearly what I'm getting at is that they have, whether it's this year or next year, I hope it's this year, they have a date in mind, I think, already of when they would feel comfortable. Unless Mac really does something to expedite the process, they have a date in mind that he's going to get in there. And I just find it really hard to believe that now, because Cam got a bone bruise on his thumb, that he's going to miss a couple of weeks that they're going to just throw that entire plan out the door because Mac looks good in shorts, right, at an OTA practice. To me, this is bigger than Cam Newton's thumb, right, is I guess what I'm getting at.
Absolutely. And real quick, by the way, if you're just joining, my power's out, which is why I'm sitting like this. I want to remind people, because if not, I look like a lunatic. I think it's funny with Mac, because the whole thing with Mac in the draft was he's one of the most NFL-ready quarterbacks out. Did not be a top pick in a long time. The only reason he really was a first-round pick, I think, was that he's a guy that could plug and play right away. You weren't drafting him that high for the upside. It was, if you want to add your young quarterback and start the rebuild and really hit the ground rolling, here's the guy. And now all of a sudden, the most NFL-ready quarterback prospect in years isn't NFL-ready enough for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. So that's the irony in it. And I don't know if that's Mac Jones. I think that's more just, they value experience so much at every position. That's what they do. I'm not knocking it, by the way. It's a big reason they are where they are. They understand that experience is valuable. Remember Tom Brady's comments about having the answers to the test. There's certainly some truth to that. I just think with Mac, for me, what it comes down to is what stood out to me about him in Alabama, not necessarily were the plays he made, but the plays he didn't. You just watched those games and you didn't really realize until after, but the kid just didn't make mistakes.
Yeah.
There weren't a ton of wow moments where you're like, wow, that's a great play, but you never said, wow, what a dumb play. Wow, what was he doing? Like, he was in command the full 60 minutes, all of that. And I think they like that. And it just comes down to how long it takes him to prove that that will carry over to the NFL level, that he won't make mistakes at the NFL level. Now, we saw at practice on Friday, after he had a great first session, there were some more rookie mistakes from him on Friday. So that's, it's kind of interesting where if you flip the sessions, right, and Mac's so-so in the first session, and he's a great second session when Cam hurts his thumb, all of a sudden we're talking about Mac's making all this progress and it's destined. Right. I don't want to say Mac took a step back. He was never going to hit that bar he hit the first practice. That was ridiculous. But I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is they're just going to wait until the mistakes, I think, dip below a certain threshold, and then they'll feel good with him, because that's what it comes down to. The Patriots believe they can win games if they don't turn the ball over. That if you just hold on to the football and don't turn it over, everything else will take care of itself. And there is some truth to that. And
they went 7-9 with a turnover machine at quarterback, quite frankly. So you could see it last year that if they have a couple of those games, Kansas City is obviously the biggest example. But if you have a couple of those games where the ball isn't getting turned over like crazy, they're going to be 10-6 last year, 11-5. Have a much better record. Right. And you mentioned that Mac Jones is a quarterback.
They just want to know that Mac isn't going to turn the ball over. I think that's what it comes down to.
And you mentioned that he's a quarterback that seldom made mistakes at Alabama. And I think a real reason why he didn't make mistakes at Alabama as much was because of the fact that he knew the system so well. And he had really mastered that Alabama playbook, and they had sort of mastered how to call plays for him with Steve Sarkisian. And if you don't feel like Mac Jones in week 1 or week 2, week 3 is ready at that level to run the playbook, then he doesn't have the physical tools to make up for it, right? He's got to win with his brain. And that's the type of quarterback that he is, and I think he's fully capable of doing that, but he's got to be able to win a little bit with his brain. And if they don't feel like he knows the system well enough and he's not there yet, then it's not going to look pretty for him, because he's not somebody like Josh Allen or like Patrick Mahomes or like Lamar Jackson, who can just go out there and play on physical gifts, right? And just look good on physical gifts. He's going to have to win with his brain. He's going to have to be the smartest guy in the huddle. Until we get to that point, I think playing him could jeopardize his confidence, and I wouldn't do that. Now, I think Mac is somebody that's a little bit more resilient, a little bit tougher than someone that's just going to let a few bad games bury him, but I still don't want to put him out there in that position. What about Jarrett Stidham, right? Do we care at all about talking about Jarrett Stidham? He had a great practice last week. There's no doubt about that. What do you make of this? Because to me, the only way that I can foresee Jarrett Stidham actually starting games for the Patriots this year is if Cam Newton is injured and Mac Jones isn't ready. right? And they just feel like, let's bridge the gap with Stidham. It's similar to like what they had with Garoppolo in 2016, where maybe this could be a trade showcase, right? Like maybe he actually plays well and we can actually get something beneficial out of this. I just don't see, without outside factors, without injuries, without things going his way, I just don't see him winning it outright. Like just being the best quarterback in camp and winning the job.
So, I mean, look, he was the best quarterback on the field on Friday after Cam got hurt. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And at the end of the day, the best quarterback's going to play. Right. I'd like to think that's what it's going to come down to. Now, the issue with Stidham is that was one practice. And not only does he have to be better than Cam Newton and Mac Jones, you know, where Cam's starting from a level ground, Mac's maybe starting a little bit in the negative just by being a rookie. Stidham has to overcome everything from last year and the struggles from last year and not being able to win the job last year. So he's got a long way to go, probably a longer way than the other quarterbacks on the roster. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. If he practices like that between now and week 1, and he's doing that in training camp, and he's leading the ones up and down the field in 11s and all of that, then yeah, we need to have that serious discussion. Is there any reason to believe that will happen? I don't know. Anybody can get hot. Anybody can have one day and get hot and look good. Let's see him do it again and again and again, and then we can start to talk about it. He had the one good day, and it deserves to be mentioned. Absolutely. You know, we ripped the kid. We've ripped the kid enough that when he has a good day, we should give him his props. But there was one good practice as he's entering his 3rd year in the league. Let's see him kind of string them together now.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone brought up a good point that I just wanted to address quickly about the Patriots, like picking plays to help Jared Stidham's trade value, right? Like knowing that what they're going to run is going to work against a certain coverage. So Jared Stidham looks good. I think that's a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, but the 2 throws that he made that everybody's talking about as like the wow plays at practice were those 2 in-breaking routes where the Patriots ran what's called a dagger concept, right? The inside receiver runs a vertical clear-out route. The outside receiver runs the deep dig inside there. And the vertical route, typically, especially against zone coverage, will clear out the middle of the defense and present that dig route as the sort of number one option on that progression for the QB. And that's what he ran twice. He makes that throw to Isaiah Zuber. They came back to it later against Jacoby Myers. I'm not going to go full conspiracy theory and say that they're calling plays to make sure that Jared Stidham looks good in front of the media, because I don't know if that's necessarily true. But they did call plays in both those instances that work really well against the coverage that they faced. And maybe they ran the same plays with Mac Jones and he just didn't make the throw. I really have to go back and be able to watch the tape, which we obviously don't have the benefit of. But those 2 coverages that they ran it against, one was 3, one was cover 4. A dagger concept against those types of coverages is usually a pretty big call for Josh McDaniels. You're playing a very heavy quarters-based or zone coverage team. He's going to call a lot of those types of plays because he knows that the clear out route's going to work, and he knows the dagger and the in cut is going to work, and that's how you coordinate. That's how you play call, right? So it is an interesting theory of, how much hype do they want to get out about Jared Stidham and maybe push him up a little bit. No one knows other than what we report now at this point of how anybody looks, right? No, it's not coming from the team. So it'd be really interesting to see how good he looks and if I can correlate it to anything to do with the play calling. I never really thought of that because, again, it's like kind of full-blown conspiracy, but it is fun to think about.
I look like I'm hosting a conspiracy theory podcast right now. I got to tell you this, guys. Trader Joe's makes their parking lot smaller than they need to be so the stores look fuller. Like that's my super low rent conspiracy theory.
Let's talk about some of these other players on offense.
Yeah.
Who else are you looking to see out on Thursday? Who are you excited to watch? Is there anybody that caught your eye last week that you want to see if they can stack it together? Anything like that?
Well, Stidham. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on Stidham on Thursday. I don't know if he'll be there because he hasn't been. I'm really excited to see Ramondre Stevenson whenever we finally get a shot to see him. It's funny. He's been in pictures at some of these OTA practices, but he hasn't been at the media ones. So, and I think Ivan Fear said last week he was dealing with some minor injury or something, but that's the guy I'm really juiced up to see, especially after last week and seeing Nelson Aguilar, seeing Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, some of these new guys, those were at the top of my list. But now that we're past that, the more I look into Ramondre Stevenson and the more I watch him, and then we heard Ivan Fears talk about him, Josh McDaniels talk about him, I'm really, really, really excited about the potential that this kid has. I think they might have truly found something. I said this when they picked him. The Patriots haven't had a true 3-down back in a while, right? Maybe since Corey Dillon, like a true 3-down back. I think Stevenson might have that potential. And that's really exciting to me. And a guy who's 6'1", 250, can move like he can catch the ball like he can block like he can. They can get really creative with that kind of player. So I don't think we're going to see him till minicamp just because, that's not inside information. If we haven't seen him yet, I don't think we will. But that's a guy I can't wait to watch personally.
Yeah, I'm actually going to stick with the running backs and go with J.J. Taylor because he has looked good in practice. No doubt about that. But the problem that I have with J.J. Taylor and hyping him up in these practices is there's no contact. Right, you can't hit anybody, right. And when you have a running back that's a 5'5", 5'6", whatever, I think they list him at like 5'8", but I don't think he's actually 5'8". When he's that much of a jitterbug, right, and he's that quick and he's that fast and he's that explosive, these are where you shine, right? There's helmets and shorts and jerseys on. There's no pads. There's no contact. There's no jamming a running back out of the backfield. There's no running over a running back and blitz pickup. There's nothing like that at all. So, yeah, he's going to look great in June. He's a June player, J.J. Taylor, right? He's a preseason player. Quite, as well. He's a guy that you put him out there against the 3s and the 4s of an opponent in the third quarter of a preseason game, and he's going to absolutely ball out against those guys because he's too talented to go up against those players. So what I want to see out of J.J. Taylor is he going to continue to just be so impressive in shorts that we have to give him credit for it heading into camp? And what kind of role can he carve out for himself in this offense? Because those Rex, as much as we think that Ramondre Stevenson is going to step into that Rex Burkhead role, those Rex Burkhead snaps are available. James White is getting longer in the tooth every single year, and they only signed him to a 1-year deal. So that door is ajar now for J.J. Taylor.
And like we just talked about with the quarterbacks, right? Experience is key. Taylor doesn't have a ton, right? Played 3 games last year, 4 games last year, but he's got more experience than Stevenson. He's got a whole year, a whole camp, right? A whole, practices, all of that. So yeah, I still think Taylor's the 4th back over Stevenson just because of the way they treat running backs historically. But yeah, that role's there if he can take it.
The juice is noticeable with him, and it was noticeable when he got into games last year as well, right? So this isn't something that we're just talking about at practice. When he played last year and got those opportunities early on in the season, the Raiders game I think stands out the most. He has some explosiveness. He's got some juice. He's got some ability to do some different things. He can return kicks even or punts potentially as well. So that's another role. The player that he often gets compared to, because Ivan Fears went this direction, was Dion Lewis. I wonder if he can sort of be the Patriots' Darren Sproles a little bit, as someone that can do it on special teams. Dion did return kickoffs, I guess, so that, he did have that role down pat as well.
But it comes down to Darren Sproles, for his size, was a great pass blocker. That's what J.J. Taylor, and we haven't seen him do a ton of it. I'm not saying he can't, but it's very difficult, right? J.J. Taylor's 5'7", and he's got to block, Von Miller coming flying off the edge or whoever. Right. That's, that's what it's going to come down to for him. I think if he can prove to be a capable pass blocker, there's going to be a significant role for him because he seems like he can handle the rest of the responsibilities. But that's a big if. That's a lot he's got to work on and get good at. And I'm not saying he can't, but we won't know until probably the preseason. Even in training camp, sometimes it's hard to see some of that stuff with the blocking, right? We may not know until we see him in a preseason game where he's at in pass pro.
Yeah, and that's the main thing to me is, look, it's great that he looks great out there right now. And it's great that he's going to be this player that when there's no contact and you're just running around out there in shorts, he's definitely noticeable, and it's palpable that he's playing very well out there and he's making progress and all these types of things. But to me, if I see it on Thursday, if I see it in minicamp, it will definitely be at the top of my list to look at once we actually put the pads on and real football begins. Can he continue it then? Then maybe I'll get excited about JJ Taylor. Right now, I kind of feel like this is a conversation in June that we're having because JJ Taylor is quick and he's fast and he's elusive and he's explosive and nobody can touch him. So that's sort of where I'm at right now with it.
So somebody brought up in the chat, and this is a good point. You know, if he puts the weight on, he can block, and that's not incorrect, but you have to be able to put the weight on and keep your speed and keep your elusiveness and keep your balance, and that's not always easy. That's why
he doesn't have a huge frame, right? He doesn't have a lot of size to put that weight on.
That's why I like Devonta Smith, right? Maybe slipped a little bit in the draft, because is he going to be as fast? Is he going to be as agile when he puts that weight on? You know, so it's not as simple as saying put muscle on, you're a better blocker. You still got to be able to do everything else. Again, not saying he can't do it, but this is always a tricky one. When you get a player like that, when you're looking at this kind of situation, it can be a little tricky.
Okay, let's talk about the defense. This is something that I'm really excited about because they made all these signings in free agency. They really rebuilt that front seven after the draft as well with the Barmore and Ronnie Perkins picks. And although, again, grain of salt, OTAs, all that kind of stuff, we are starting to see it kind of translate onto the field in just terms of depth in bodies, right? So Matt Judon returns to practice this week, and that picture that they posted on Patriots.com of Judon, Van Noy, and Josh Uche, that's sort of when the light bulb went off in my head where I'm like, wow, that's only 3 of their linebackers, right? Like then you throw Dante Hightower, then you throw Chase Winovich, and we keep on going down the line. This group is reminiscent, at least on paper, again, of the Boogeyman, right, of the 2019 Patriots linebacking corps. I don't know if they'll be as good as that group was, but that's sort of where it took me because it's just like, wow, those 3 guys are all studs, and as long as Uche develops the way that we think he's going to, and that's only half of the guys that we can really sink our teeth to and describe. This is going to be a really, really deep defense, and this defense I think has a chance to be top 5 in the league and the metrics that matter with Bill Belichick scheming it up and game planning and with the talent that they have now in the front 7.
Oh, they should be top 5. I think this team has to, you know, even with what they did adding the tight ends, this team's going to win games defensively. This team's going to sink or swim based on what the defense does. You mentioned the linebackers. You know, I talked about before, you can't look at the wide receivers without the tight ends. With the linebackers, you know, that's not even talking about who they added up front, who they added on the defensive line, Devon Godshaw, Henry Anderson, bringing back Dietrich Wise, Lawrence Guy, the draft picks up front, Christian Barmore. So this is going to be a really special defensive unit. I would say, though, let's not call them the Boogeymen. I think there's negative association with that.
As you say,
I think Chris Sale. Right. I think Chris Sale also got that nickname today. So I don't know if you saw that.
We can come up with a better nickname.
And it's got, I think the whole front 7 really deserves to be a nickname the way they've built this team, because you have a lot of guys, whether it's Judon, whether it's Uche, whether it's Winovich, who I think are going to kind of be hybrids and are going to be used as both linebackers and defensive linemen, edge players. And I think that's where a lot of the danger comes from. I know this is a negative memory for a lot of Patriots fans, but I try not to bring this up. I'm going to. It reminds me a little bit of the Giants' NASCAR defense. And it's not just that all those guys were talented. And of course, they had a ton of talent up there, right? But they could all play all over the place. And you had to, when you got to the line, every play, take note of where everybody was, because no 2 players were in the same space on back-to-back snaps. And it just adds to that efficiency. It makes the defense that much more lethal. I think that, you know, certain guys are going to play in certain spots. You're not playing Devon Godshaw anywhere other than the nose, right? But I think, a guy like Matthew Judon can probably play 3 or 4 spots. Chase Winovich can play 3, 4, 5 spots. Josh Uche could play a couple spots. I think when they start moving those guys around, and you'll see that more as the season goes on, right? They'll have a look, teams start to figure it out, then they move the pieces around, they refresh it. It's going to, you know, what the Boogeymen couldn't do. The Boogeymen, their first iteration, they played 7, 8, 9 games and people figured it out and they fell apart. I think this defense is going to be able to refresh itself and throw new looks at an offense during the course of a game, during the course of a season. And other than the raw talent, the versatility, I think, excites me just as much.
Yeah, last year but mostly because of newness of the players, I think, but because of a lot of different factors. All the blitzing and the amoeba fronts and the cover zero, all that stuff went out the window. And the Patriots, they zigged when everybody thought that they were sticking to zag. When they come out with these cover zeros, they come out with the amoeba fronts, and everybody sort of caught on to it, I would say. And so what the Patriots did is they started running 8-man coverages and 7-man coverages and dropping everybody. And these quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson just picked them apart, right? They just picked the coverages apart because there's no pass rush. So now I really think the Patriots are going to hopefully get back to attacking. And that's what I want to see out of this defense this year, because they have all these options. They have all these bodies. They have all this versatility, all this athleticism now at that level of the D. Let's get back into attack mode, because I think that that's the capability that this defense has, is similar to what we did on offense. Who's the defensive player that you're looking at? Who's somebody that caught your eye or you're hoping is going to catch your eye again on Thursday?
So I don't know. I'm going to go a little kind of around the question. I'm still very intrigued at what they're doing at outside corner. And that's not a specific player, but the position, right? I mean, Stephon Gilmore, we don't know what's going to happen with him. J.C. Jackson is probably the most secure in that spot, but they don't have a ton of depth at outside corner right now, right? They lose Jason McCourty, and now you're down to Juwan Williams is probably the favorite for that third outside corner job, but does not have a ton of experience. Then you go to Michael Jackson, who we don't really know what he is. And then you're talking about moving Jalen Mills in from safety, I think would be the fifth on that depth chart. And if I'm missing somebody, correct me, but I believe would be the fifth on that depth chart. We know they worked out Trey Kirkpatrick. He just took a visit with the Saints, so I don't think that's happening, but they got, slot corner, they're great. And some people are going to say, what about Jonathan Jones? What about Miles Bryant? Different positions, really. You're not going to put Jonathan Jones one-on-one man coverage on the outside, right, with a guy like, I'll just say Julio Jones, because we were talking about him, but that elite X outside receiver, they need another guy there. They do. Even if Gilmore comes back and Jackson comes back, those guys probably aren't going to play 16, 17 games. You're going to want to spell those guys. You're going to want to keep those guys rested. So that's the big thing to me is, does Juwan Williams look like he's ready to make that year 3 jump? He was a second-round pick. Does he look ready to step into that role? Is Michael Jackson a find? I mean, wouldn't be the first time it wouldn't be the first time they found a corner out of nowhere. He was at least a 7th-round pick. Some of these guys are UDFAs, but I don't think I think that's the most understated element to this roster right now is what's going on at the outside corner spot.
We talk so much about the wide receivers. I think it's the biggest hole on the team right now. Everybody talks about trading Stephon Gilmore, and there's a little bit of chatter about maybe trading J.C. Jackson if they want to extend Gilmore. If you trade one of those two guys, we're approaching 09 to 2011 territory with that secondary, right? Where you're playing Lee Boddins and all these guys out there.
Earthwind Moreland.
Right. Like, we don't want that again, right? Nobody wants that again. So the real question is, after we've seen these practices with OTAs and Juwan Williams and Michael Jackson are your two basically starting outside corners at these OTA practices because Gilmore and Jackson aren't there, it really puts into perspective how thin they are behind those guys with just proven NFL talent. So I don't think they're done there. I think they're going to have to use some of that cap space that they have to either sign somebody that's currently a free agent who's a veteran. The chat, Richard Sherman, I've already sort of said that I don't know about Richard Sherman. You mentioned Drake Kirkpatrick.
I thought he would have been the perfect guy. I really thought that was a fit. I was surprised that he got away.
And maybe this doesn't happen until an injury in camp happens or a resolution with Stephon Gilmore happens. And maybe that's when they sort of make the decision of what they're going to do at corner. But if you go into the season, and even if they keep Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson, if you go into the season, are you prepared for Juwan Williams to be your top backup at outside corner? If one of those two guys goes down, he's going to play significant snaps. Is he ready for that?
I think Jason McCourty played 60-something% of the snaps last year, and I know some of that was at safety, but, forget one of those guys going down. I think right now, Juwan Williams is playing significant snaps if the regular
unless they put Jalen Mills in that role, right? Like, and unless Jalen Mills is that guy,
I think I'd honestly rather Williams. I think I'd honestly rather Williams. I don't
disagree necessarily.
So, I think Jalen Mills has shown that he's going to be an impact as a safety. Maybe if Patrick Chung's still here, I feel differently. But that's another spot, deep safety, second safety, guys who have experience playing, 15, 20 yards back at the NFL level. Right now it's Devin McCourty and Adrian Colbert, and that's it. And Kyle Duggar's done it in college, and I know you're a huge fan of kind of bringing him back into that role. And I'm not saying he can't do it, but he hasn't really done it at the NFL level. So the secondary at the top is still elite. Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson, Devin McCourty, that's as good of a group as you're going to find. But, for the past couple of years, there's been so much depth behind those guys, and that depth's kind of quietly trickled out. And I think we're starting to see it a little bit here. And I'm interested to see how they address it. I think they'll address it. I don't think they'll go into the season with this group. Maybe it's something, maybe they wait until roster cuts and it's somebody who gets cut, and you have the staggered cuts are back now. So you're not going right from 90 to 53. I think it's 90 to 80 to 75 to 53, something like that. But they're going to need to add players in the secondary. They are.
It's an interesting conversation because I think we just get so caught up in the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. And you and I have been talking about corner going back to the draft. They need to draft a corner, and not to get on the Belichick draft record sort of conversation, but Juwan Williams is supposed to be that guy, right? They drafted Juwan Williams in the second round for this purpose, right? For knowing that Stephon Gilmore, Jason McCourty, these guys' time was coming up, right? And they knew that they needed to start to look to the future. And that's why they made the Juwan Williams pick a top 50 corner. They made that pick looking towards the future of that position. If he's not ready to do it, then that's a disappointing sort of outcome, certainly. And I think Michael Jackson's like a nice camp story, right? I'm sure we'll write about him in training camp, and we'll say, oh, he's had a nice camp. And this Michael Jackson.
There will be puns. There will be puns. It won't be that simple. There will be a ton of puns.
Oh yeah, Michael Jackson's is a fourth or a fifth corner at best, right? Like that. He's, no offense to Michael Jackson, but if you're putting Michael Jackson out there as your starting corner, again, we're talking about Lee Bodden, we're talking about Hank Boat. We're back in that territory.
Right. I mean, look, I'm not going to write him off totally. I'm not, because they've shown they can identify talent at that position from anywhere. J.C. Jackson, Malcolm Butler, Jonathan Jones, Crayvon LeBlanc. These are all NFL corners who they found undrafted. Jackson was a draft pick, his 7th round pick. They traded for him. So I'm not totally going to write him off, but they got him from Detroit. I see there in the comments. At the same time, they can find these guys, but not every guy they find is a hit. I'm not going to bank on this guy becoming something. I'd like to see them hedge their bets. I think if you just brought in a veteran, just to play it safe, and maybe Juwan Williams emerges, maybe Michael Jackson emerges, but I'd like to have a veteran option just in case they don't. I think that, that safety blanket would be helpful.
Yeah, I hate to keep banging this drum, but this is because Juwan Williams is not panning out. Right, like you have to call it for what it is, because
has he not panned out? Like I can't say he hasn't panned out because I haven't seen him play poorly. I
can't say he hasn't panned out yet. I'll put it to you that way. But if they have to go and make a move, or let's say they have to end up letting Stephon Gilmore hit free agency because they need to hang on to him this year, and the best that they can do is get that 3rd round pick back, or maybe they don't even get a 3rd round comp pick back because they spend some more money next offseason. That's going to be because Juwan Williams is supposed to be that guy, and they missed on that pick.
But at the same time,
we're still talking about potentially missing on that pick, right? But we haven't gotten fully there yet. But you have to call for what it is.
But that's also half the picture. Why didn't he get a chance to play? Because he's behind Stephon Gilmore. Because he's behind J.C. Jackson. He's been behind great players. That's why it's an unfortunate situation. I don't know that I don't know that they made a mistake. Because again, the reason did they, when they made that pick, did they plan on J.C. Jackson being the player he is? Or did they think that was going to be Juwan Williams playing opposite Stephon Gilmore? Were they going to turn him into a safety?
And I know, that's the thing that they do to you, right? That's the thing they do to you. They take an undrafted guy, turns into a Pro Bowler, so the 2nd round pick busting doesn't matter, right? That's what ends up happening when you're the Patriots.
So that's why I'm saying this is such a huge camp for Juwan Williams, because he hasn't really had that chance to show that he can be that guy. And it's unfair. You'd like to see him get to prove it in games in the regular season, with actual stakes. He's not going to get that chance. The best he's going to have is this training camp in this preseason, and he's got to make the most of it. If he does, and he turns out great, and it's going to be awesome until he's a free agent in a year, and you're saying, wow, that contract flew by. They had this good player. He only played for a year. But I have trouble calling the Juwan Williams pick a bust. I have trouble saying they blew that pick.
I'm not saying it's a bust yet. I'm not saying they blew the pick yet. I'm saying that if Jawan Williams can't play, if they feel like he can't play, and they had to do all these other things, all these gymnastics to get around the fact that they made that pick and he can't play, then we have to talk about the pick,
what I'm saying now, we're going to find out, because we didn't know if he could play because he's been stuck behind all these guys, right?
He's not stuck anymore.
He's not stuck behind Jason McCourty. Gilmore might not be there in camp. Now it's put up or shut up now. Now the training wheels are coming off. The blinders are coming off. We're going to see no more protecting him. We're going to see exactly what he is. Probably not until training camp, but we're going to see.
It's true for both guys that got drafted in the top of that draft for the Patriots. N'Keal Harry's in the same boat, right? Like,
I don't know that who was N'Keal Harry really buried behind?
No. He wasn't buried behind anybody. I'm just saying it's put up or shut up time.
Put up or shut up. Yeah, different situation. Yes, but I would agree with you. It's put up. Yeah. That's a good point.
There's no more excuses anymore for either one of those guys, and that it is what it is. Like, I'm not going to sit here and like everybody else and lambaste Belichick for all these bad drafts as Atlas has decided to.
Atlas does not like the take.
No, we're 53 minutes into the show, so we almost made it without Alice freaking out. So that's pretty good. Do you want to take some questions here to round this out, and then we'll call it a night? We lost Alex to the power outage once again. So we'll take some questions. Hopefully we'll get Alex back here in a few minutes, and we can include him in the chat here. Hopefully he figures out a way. I love how it's just frozen on his face just like that. That's great. Hopefully some of you were able to screen grab that. So just go ahead and ask some questions, Alex, to hopefully figure out a way to get back in here. And let's just start with some of these ones that we got earlier in the show, and then we can work our way down. Now I got to scroll back. Damian Harris is a good question here about him being the top running back. Now, the Patriots are always a team that does it by committee anyways. So, there's Alex. Mr. Power Outage is back.
Well, the power's already out. That was probably just my phone or something. I don't know. But okay, let's take some questions, tell some ghost stories.
There we go. So the question that I was just about to answer was about Damian Harris and being RB1. And I sort of caveated it with saying the Patriots never truly have an RB1, right? Like, they most of the time, unless they get like a Corey Dillon type, they're rotating through a bunch of guys. But do you still feel like Damian Harris is the favorite to have the most carries at the end of the year, obviously barring injury or anything like that?
No, so here's why. It's not because I don't believe in him as a player. I think the Patriots have a tendency when running backs are in the last year of their deal to capitalize on that being the last year, right? I think sometimes they know these guys, and look, this sounds kind of heartless, but it's a business. They know these guys aren't coming back. They're not too worried about weighing on the future and, what the workload means for 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And Sony's in the last year of his deal, and I think they're going to take advantage of that. So I think Harris is going to get a significant number of carries. I'm not saying they're going to bench Damian Harris or anything. He's going to be a regular part of the offense, but we've seen them do this in the past with running backs, where when it's guys last year, they get every drop out of him they can, and I think we're going to see that with Sony.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sony is on the last year of his contract. It does feel like a year where you just sort of get the most out of him. Whatever's left in the tank, the Patriots are going to want to get out of him, right? And I still think Damian Harris is the best pure ball carrier on the roster. I would agree. Without seeing Ramondre Stevenson, who might be in that conversation eventually, but just in terms of pure put the ball in his hands, what can he do after that? Burst, vision, elusiveness, power, contact balance, I would say, is more than elusiveness, I guess. Those things, I think Damian Harris is still the best all-around back the Patriots have in terms of pure ball carrier. So I still think that he's going to be the favorite. I think he's still going to be the guy that should get most of the carries. But you're right. I think there's going to be a pretty heavy split there between him and Sony Michel, just because of all the reasons that you mentioned. Dan Vitale did something that I don't think I've ever seen anybody do before. He announced his retirement via LinkedIn the other night.
Serious?
I am dead serious. He posted on his LinkedIn that he's looking for a change, that his body has given out on him with football and he's in the market for another profession, announcing his retirement via LinkedIn. And are you surprised that Dan Vitale is never going to play in a Patriot uniform. And I think secondly to that, the most important question, these guys that opted out, and I think Hightower, Bolden, or maybe the two guys left that Lacoste as well. So there's three. Is this concerning about these guys that have sat out an entire year? Gerard Mayo talked about it with Dante Hightower. Ramping it back up after you've been on your couch for an entire year is difficult. It's not like it's an injury where you're having something that you're motivated by, right? Or you're doing rehab and you're still in the heartbeat of the whole thing. This is a completely different away from the facility. It's hard to ramp it back up after a year sitting around.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm not surprised he's never going to play for the team. I didn't think like last year when they signed him kind of later in the process. And I was wondering, I thought he might be a fringe roster guy, especially after they drafted Izzo. Certainly would have been interesting. Retiring on LinkedIn's amazing. I love that. Yeah. That's fantastic. As for the opt-outs, I think you're selling it a little short. I think there is some motivation to come back. A lot of these guys, and we heard it. And by the way, this is not true by any means. I hated people who had this take, but remember last year, people were calling these guys soft. They were calling them quitters. They were calling them out. Yeah. And again, awful take. These guys have legitimate reasons for opting out. Don't fault them for it, but they heard it. I'm sure they heard it, and I'm sure they didn't like it. I don't think if you're Dante Hightower and somebody calls you soft, Dante Hightower is not exactly, he might be at the bottom of my list when you talk about soft. He's certainly, so I think there is still some motivation to come back. Sitting on the couch, I also think is a bit strong. You'd like to think these, they stayed in shape and did what they could, but I think there is an element of, look, it's not exactly the same thing. It's a little bit apples and oranges, but I'm somebody who has worked 7 days a week since I was 18, pretty much. I got laid off during the pandemic. Not that, this works incredibly, but I've been, doing pretty much 7 days a week. I got laid off. I sat on my ass and played GTA for 10 hours a day. It was a little weird coming back to, working in sports is a slightly different schedule. Again, not that it's tough, but you generally are doing 7 days a week, nights and weekends. And it was a little bit of a grind at first. I'm happy I'm doing it. I'm glad I'm still doing it. But you do kind of think twice about what you're doing. You do kind of think, I've seen the other side now. And, maybe some guys prefer that. I won't fault them for it. But
especially some of these guys that have made some money, right? Like Dante Hightower's.
Right. I'm not saying talking about Hightower.
I'm not saying Hightower is retiring. I don't think Hightower is retiring. But you make that kind of money already in your NFL career and you get back in camp. I think the biggest worry that you have with a guy like Hightower is that he gets back into camp and he pulls a Rob Ninkovich, right? Like he gets back here, he realizes, wait a second, the body's not responding, right? I'm not able to ramp it back up. I'm not able to get to that level again. And I think he's going to report. I think he's going to come here with all the intentions in the world to play in 2021. I think the fear that the coaching staff has with him, based off of what we've heard from Mayo, even a little bit from Belichick, is Gerard Mayo or is Dante Hightower's body going to allow him to ramp things back up to be the true Dante Hightower again? Or is the year off going to sort of kill that progress, right? And that's the fear that I have with him. I don't have any fear whatsoever with Dante Hightower's intentions to play. I think he has full intentions to play this year. I'd be worried about him getting into camp and, like Ninkovich, recognizing I just don't have it anymore.
Well,
I just don't have it.
Right. I will say this about Dante Hightower. And he's had his injuries, certainly, and this factors in, but people talk about him like he's an old man. He just turned 31 in March. He's not, he's hardly a rookie, but 31's not that old. Most players retire around 32, 33, 34. So he should have a year or two left. Again, we don't know how the pandemic affects it, but people are talking about Dante Hightower like he's 45 years old. They're talking about him like he's Zdeno Chara. Like he's 31. He's been one of the best pure athletes on the team for a long time. We need to just stop treating him like an old man, basically, is what I'd say. He's younger than you realize. Again, the injuries kind of alter that a little bit, and I get that.
Injuries, long
he's not an old man. Right,
no,
but he's not an old man.
A lot of tread off those tires, though. You got to admit that.
Sure, sure. But I think when I said that to somebody the other day, I was having this discussion with somebody, and they were like, "Yeah, well, like, I just don't know. Some guys retire around that age anyway," and they were shocked when I told them he was 31. So I just want to remind people of that. He is 31.
All right, let's end it on this one. I like this question. Not necessarily the biggest. Hunter Henry has a great year. Matt Judon has a great year. Value. Who is the best contract out of the guys that they sign based off their production.
So I will go extreme value here. And by the way, I've pumped this guy's tires before on the show. I really like Adrian Colbert. I think he adds something that they need. He can play deep safety, but he's a big physical safety, which they like. There's a pretty clear-cut role for him on this defense. He's got to make the team, and it's competitive there, right? There's a role for him, but it's a little bit limited. And would they rather have, another wide receiver, another lineman? But if he makes the team, I think Adrian Colbert could be a sneaky good, sneaky useful player. If we're talking about value, if we're talking about bang for your buck, I think Adrian Colbert's going to go a long way.
If he can carve out a role, it'll Adrian Phillips right? If he can find a place to play, I think Kendrick Bourne has a really good case for this one. But I'm going to go Henry Anderson. I just sort of feel like last year they were so bad against the run last year. I mean, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. And what they really lacked, they lacked a true nose tackle. Gottschalk becomes that. But what they truly, really lacked, I thought as well, was a second defensive end to play in base on first down, right? They had Lawrence Guy, who could play as that strong side 4-eye 5 technique, but that weak side defensive end role, and teams just ran off tackle weak against them a ton. And what they had out there was an Adam Butler, a Dietrich Wise, and Chase Winovich a lot of the time. And teams just ran off that off-tackle weak side a whole lot, and they got gashed going that direction. So having somebody on the backside like Henry Anderson that has that ability to be stout and hold up at the point of attack and control his gap or control a double team if they do run it weak side and try to double team and pull a guard or something like that, or combo block. Another one of those big-bodied run stuffers, I think, is going to really pay huge dividends, because we talk so much about pass defense. It is the most important thing in the NFL. But what's really difficult about playing pass defense is when you're in second and third and short the entire game, because you can't stop the run on first down. So if teams are going from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 5 consistently because they're getting 5 yards a pop on the ground, now your entire repertoire of 3rd and long, blitz packages, zero stuff, all that kind of stuff, you throw it out the door, because there's just not enough time to do that. There's not enough opportunities to do that. That's the problem I thought the Patriots ran into last year a whole lot, was 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. The whole playbook is open for the offense. You can't be as aggressive as you'd like to be on the defensive side of the football. That becomes problematic. So stopping the run on first down, making sure that they can stop the run and going to the weak side of the formation off the tackle, that's going to be a huge thing. I think Henry Anderson can really help out with that. All right, so Alex,
can I add one more, because somebody brought it up in the chat, and it's a really good one. Raekwon McMillan, signing I was really high on. A guy, was a 2nd-round pick, was a 100-tackle guy as a rookie for the Dolphins. He had a torn ACL. I can't remember what the other injury was, but he's dealt with some injuries. But if he's healthy, Juwan Bentley in the last year of his deal has some trade value. If McMillan can show there's not much of a drop-off, and again, this is where it gets into a tight roster crunch. McMillan's also been a core special teams player for 3 years. And if he can do what Bentley does on defense and play special teams, that's a way to maybe consolidate the roster. Nothing against Juwan Bentley, but it's going to come down to, when you're making this roster, not just how good are the players, but how many different roles can the players play. I think McMillan has a chance to be a key player for this team. So I think it was Robert who brought that up. Great point. Definitely a player to keep an eye on.
Can I just go on like a tiny little mini rant before we sign off about this Cam Newton Mastros BS?
I would rather not add fire to it, but if you want to go ahead.
I want to put the fire out, because I just want to say, can we please stop believing everybody that was at Mastros on a Wednesday night and thinks they saw Cam Newton and tweeted about it and has 100 followers and has no way to confirm it? We've been doing this all offseason, all these people all offseason. Julio Jones, if you go on Twitter and you read some random Twitter account, Julio Jones was a Patriot 7 times in the last month, right? And it just... It's not about, me saying, oh, I know and they don't know or anything like that. It just stop believing everything that you read on the damn internet. Use some common sense and be able to look through some of this stuff. It would really behoove a lot of people, because this is how rumors get started. This is how people get confirmed stuff that's not true. This is how, things start with Cam. And I just don't want to see that anymore with Cam. So let's be a little bit more aware of what we're looking at, right?
If I can add something to that, because if we're going to do this, let's do it. It's not, the Julio Jones stuff's different, but when it comes to Cam at Mastros, right? Ask yourself this. Cam Newton's a pretty recognizable figure. Yeah. He's
He's
odds
huge.
are
He's 6'6", 250 pounds.
Unless he's buying his offensive line dinner, he's probably the biggest person at any bar or restaurant he's at, I would guess.
Yeah.
And then 6'6", and then if he's got his hair up right, you're pushing 7 feet. You think Cam Newton, widely recognized celebrity football player Cam Newton, could get in a fight in a bar in Boston and we wouldn't hear about it until 4 days later, and there'd somehow be no video, no pictures? I don't know that these guys, forget pictures of a fight. How many of these guys can go out to eat without somebody just saying, hey, can I get a picture with you? Or Instagram storing them across the restaurant. If you think Cam could go to a restaurant in Boston, get in a fight, and we wouldn't hear about it and there'd be no pictures about it, like, again, is it impossible? No. In the social media age, that feels unbelievable to me. So
Cam's also a vegan, and Masters is a steakhouse. I just want to put that out there as well.
They have a good bar.
Maybe he's there with friends. I guess I don't know. They said he was there with his brother. He
enjoys a good scotch. They have a good bar. I'll give him credit for that. It's just
dangerous. It's just dangerous that we get this stuff put out.
We were there. We were there. He was throwing. We saw him making one-handed catches. So yeah. The timeline's not there for you if this is what you're trying to claim. The timeline's not there.
That's the other point that I was going to make too before I end this rant, is that the time we were there and we saw Cam Newton get injured and we saw the hand be a problem and we saw the practice, before that, the hand wasn't a problem. Then something went down and the hand was a problem. Right. You know what I mean? So right. So this is not a situation where they made this up to cover up. Like, let's stop it with that type of stuff. All right. That's all I got to say. All right. And then on Thursday, we will be back on the podcast, as this whole time this free agent question has been up as I'm ranting about this stupid Cam Newton stuff. On Thursday, we'll be back on the podcast, hopefully following Alex and I's viewing of OTAs. So
assuming I have power by then.
Assuming you have power by then.
Apparently the sources are saying there's a down power line near here, so we'll see.
Oh, great. So, well, hopefully...
Wait, you know what? I have this platform, right? Like Big Cat from Barstool goes after airlines. Eversort. Oh, Eversort. Eversort sucks. Weren't they the ones who had that whole problem in Northern Mass with the explosions and whatever? Come on, Eversource. Come on. The storm wasn't that bad. It's over. Let's go. Come on. All right. There's my rant.
Okay, so on that note, we can sign off until Thursday night. We'll be back then to break down OTAs, preview mini camp, and discuss everything that we saw at practice on Thursday. But thanks so much for joining us tonight, guys. This was a lot of fun, even with Alex in his power outage bunker there that he's in. I know a lot of people are going to watch this on the rewatch and be like, what the heck is going on with Alex? But Alex is fine. He's safe. He is just experiencing a typical New England thunderstorm.
It's all good. I'm verified.
An hour and 10 minutes before we had to mention that.
It was in the chat somewhere.
I'm signing off now. All right. For Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you Thursday night.